The fierce little wife, married for 3 years, still couldn't get into bed with her husband to help her daughter get pregnant soon and solidify her position as the wife of a tycoon. Her mother brought her a black lace nightgown, forcing her to wear it, but the two still couldn't get together. To escape this life, she wore that sexy nightgown again that day, took a seductive photo of her legs, and then posed as a kidnapper, lying that she had been kidnapped. No way? You don't even know about the mole on her leg? Have you never stripped her naked? The shameless mockery indeed provoked the CEO. He stormed home, fuming with anger, wanting to rip his wife's clothes off to see for himself. At this moment, the little wife heard her husband's hurried footsteps, and was so scared she hid under the blanket, trembling. Finally, during the struggle, the CEO pulled off the blanket. This made the wife unconsciously utter 2 words, "So cold." 3 years ago, to make up for the grave mistake of her sister running away from the wedding, Wei Ju, who suffered from aphasia, was forced to enter a political marriage with her future brother-in-law. Who would have thought that upon meeting, Baek Saw-eon ordered Wei Ju to take off the wedding dress that didn't belong to her. Already filled with resentment, Wei Ju, without a second thought, removed the veil and accessories from her body. She didn't want to wear the wedding dress for even another second. Seeing this, Saw-eon quickly took off his coat and put it on Wei Ju, even mocking her, asking if she intended to strip naked in front of him. Then, Saw-eon gave Wei Ju a prenuptial agreement, demanding that no matter what happened, she was not allowed to be the first to file for divorce. She especially had to remain silent during the presidential election period. Furthermore, as the wife of the presidential spokesperson, she was not allowed to reveal her name and appearance to the public. If she violated any clause in the contract, she would have to pay a fine of up to 2 billion won. Faced with such unreasonable terms, Wei Ju could only helplessly sign the contract. As expected, because it was a political marriage, coupled with her aphasia, Wei Ju's married life was extremely miserable. Not only did her mother-in-law make things difficult for her, forcing her to give up her beloved job as a sign language interpreter, but even her own mother disliked Wei Ju, even forcing Wei Ju to wear black lace to seduce Baek Saw-eon. Wei Ju was already used to this. She thought her whole life would pass by vaguely like this, until one day, the car she was driving was suddenly controlled by someone else. The car sped down the road, not only losing its brakes, but the steering wheel also became unresponsive. Seeing the car stop in the middle of the road, with a truck speeding towards it, Wei Ju was scared out of her wits. Fortunately, the truck managed to swerve and avoid her in time. But before Wei Ju could breathe a sigh of relief, a man in black suddenly appeared in front of her. He was seen folding the phone that was controlling the car, walked straight towards Wei Ju, and then casually opened the car door. Then, Baek Saw-eon's side suddenly received a call from an international number. He curiously answered the call. "I'm going to kill your wife." Saw-eon thought it was a joke, and quickly hung up, but he still felt uneasy and called his mother-in-law. After confirming that Wei Ju was still at her mother's house, he breathed a sigh of relief. However, the strange number called again. Because Saw-eon always kept his wife's information very secret, he didn't believe Wei Ju had been kidnapped. When he heard the kidnapper demand a ransom, he couldn't help but scoff. "Ransom? You can ask for as much as you want. I'm not giving you a single penny anyway." This sentence angered the kidnapper. He started torturing Wei Ju in the car, and put a knife to her throat. "If you want to do it quickly. Call me back when you have a body." When Saw-eon refused to listen to the call, Wei Ju also realized she had been completely abandoned. "Call me back when you have a body." The heartless words made Wei Ju feel extremely desperate. She frantically slammed on the accelerator, preparing to die with the kidnapper. However, the scene changes, and Wei Ju appears safely at home. Not only did she hide the wounds on her body, she also cooked for her husband. At the same time, Baek Saw-eon, after finishing work, felt that something was wrong the more he thought about it. It was clear that Wei Ju's identity had been carefully hidden by him. So why could the kidnapper still find out so much information about her? And when he tried to trace the call, he couldn't find any clues about the other person. To quickly confirm Wei Ju's safety, Baek Saw-eon rushed home. It wasn't until he saw Wei Ju standing safely in front of him that Baek Saw-eon breathed a sigh of relief. He tentatively recounted what had just happened to Wei Ju. "You're still alive?" At this moment, Wei Ju, her mind filled with Saw-eon's harsh words, so she didn't tell him the full story of her kidnapping. Just then, Baek Saw-eon received a call from his subordinate, saying that the virtual number couldn't be traced. They could only wait for the next call, and try to keep it going for more than 10 minutes, to be able to locate the other person. He didn't know that their conversation was overheard by Wei Ju, who was scooping rice. At this moment, a bold idea popped into her head. The next day, Wei Ju accompanied Saw-eon to an event, acting as a sign language interpreter for the ambassador's wife. The ambassador's wife mistook Wei Ju for Baek Saw-eon's wife upon meeting her. This frightened Wei Ju, who quickly explained using sign language that she was just Baek Saw-eon's interpreter, and outside of work, they had no relationship whatsoever. The British ambassador said he had never seen Baek Saw-eon's wife at official events. Unexpectedly, Baek Saw-eon explained that his wife was his weakness. Therefore, he didn't want his wife to be exposed to the spotlight like him, and suffer unprovoked attacks from all sides. Although these words from Saw-eon seemed extremely romantic to outsiders, only Wei Ju knew how miserable her 3 years of marriage had been. Moreover, when she was kidnapped, Baek Saw-eon told the kidnapper to wait until he saw the body of his wife before contacting him again. Thinking of this, Wei Ju's heart ached. She could only use alcohol to soothe her inner pain. Seeing this, Baek Saw-eon quickly snatched the wineglass from Wei Ju. Already unhappy, Wei Ju immediately suggested leaving, but Baek Saw-eon still refused. Wei Ju had endured for 3 years, And now she didn't want to endure it anymore. She told Baek Saw-eon that even though she couldn't speak, her ears were not deaf. She could feel Baek Saw-eon's emotions and attitude towards her. He claimed he didn't want her to be exposed to unprovoked attacks. But why did she feel like she was already covered in scars? On the verge of collapse? After pouring out her feelings, Wei-ju didn't forget to curse him. Baek Saw-eon didn't know what Wei-ju had been signing all this time. But the last sentence seemed to be calling him a bastard. Soon, the kidnapper called again. Saw-eon intended to mock the kidnapper and vent his frustration at the same time. But unexpectedly, the kidnapper said something shocking, that he was right next to him. Hearing the kidnapper state his exact location, Saw-eon immediately panicked. He looked up and saw a suspicious man, and quickly chased after him. He burst into the bathroom and snatched the man's phone. "Honey, what's wrong?" Saw-eon, worried about his wife's safety, sped up his search, but he had never made his wife's information public, so he guessed the kidnapper was just trying to scare him. Unexpectedly, the other person said Wei-ju's name. "You dare to marry the younger sister who was almost your sister-in-law?" The plot is so ridiculous. Treating the two sisters like an elevator, going up and down as you please. Seeing his secret exposed, Saw-eon had to give in to the kidnapper, agreeing to all his conditions. However, Saw-eon still didn't know that the person on the other end of the line was his own wife. And what Wei-ju wanted was very simple. If Saw-eon loved her sister, and they had only completed this political marriage out of necessity, she would pose as a kidnapper to make Baek Saw-eon give up his current wife and go find his original fiancée. It turned out that day, Wei-ju slammed the gas but didn't crash. Instead, the kidnapper in the backseat's fate was unknown. Wei-ju, having narrowly escaped death, no longer wanted to be a coward, so she picked up the phone the kidnapper dropped, and was surprised to find that this phone could only call Baek Saw-eon. Not only did it have an automatic voice changer installed, but it also couldn't be traced for 10 minutes. Therefore, she wanted to pose as a kidnapper to call Baek Saw-eon to get him to give her freedom. But Wei-ju didn't know that Baek Saw-eon had already fallen in love with her. To prevent Wei-ju from marrying a debauched playboy, Saw-eon made a deal with Wei-ju's sister, for the sister to switch the bride at the wedding to her. And the reason he hid his love was also greatly related to the secret of his identity. Even though he was now the president's spokesperson, he knew everything could be exposed at any moment. Therefore, before he had enough power to protect Wei-ju, he had to always hide this love. Did he threaten you with a knife? How could something like this happen? Why didn't you tell me? Let's go to the hospital for a checkup. He also recalled the early days of his marriage to Wei-ju. Every evening, Wei-ju would personally cook and wait for him to come home from work. As a result, he was always busy with work and came home very late. Seeing Wei-ju waiting alone, dozing off, a warmth filled Baek Saw-eon's heart. He found the wife before him foolishly adorable. But when Wei-ju woke up, Baek Saw-eon quickly wiped the smile off his face and spoke cold words like a stranger. Who would have thought that in the next second, Wei-ju would down a glass of wine, and then, fueled by the alcohol, she took Baek Saw-eon's hand. To the melodious music, the two danced in the room. Unexpectedly, Wei-ju was so sleepy she couldn't keep her eyes open. It was only because of her mother's request that she had to actively please Baek Saw-eon to successfully get pregnant and solidify her position. But Baek Saw-eon's words were like a bucket of cold water splashed on the drowsy Wei-ju. "Don't bring feelings between us. You are not in my plan. So, from now on, don't interfere with or obstruct me." She didn't expect the Baek Saw-eon before her to not only treat her like air, but also issue a warning, saying that Wei-ju was not in his plan. Therefore, starting tonight, if Wei-ju interfered with or obstructed him, he would definitely not spare Wei-ju. After saying that, Baek Saw-eon left immediately, leaving Wei-ju standing there, heartbroken. The next day, when Wei-ju appeared in the living room with messy hair, she happened to see Baek Saw-eon sitting there calmly. Wei-ju thought Saw-eon was asking her to prepare breakfast for him. But in fact, Saw-eon wanted to go into the kitchen himself, and told Wei-ju to stand by and help. The reason Baek Saw-eon was acting so unusually was because yesterday, his assistant, while investigating the kidnapper, had secretly taken a picture. Wei-ju was talking to a man and laughing very happily. Therefore, a jealous Saw-eon took the opportunity of cooking to ask who the man Wei-ju met yesterday was. When he learned it was Wei-ju's university senior, Saw-eon then asked if they were close. Was that senior trustworthy enough for Wei-ju? After receiving an affirmative answer, Saw-eon's jealousy could no longer be hidden. Then, he took the opportunity of grabbing something to tease Wei-ju. This unintentional action made Wei-ju's heart flutter. Then, Baek Saw-eon placed the food he had finished cooking in front of Wei-ju, and told her to eat it all. At this moment, Wei-ju realized that Baek Saw-eon had specially made this meal for her. Back at the office, Saw-eon reviewed the surveillance footage from the night Wei-ju was kidnapped. He discovered the kidnapper got into the car without any force, but sat down very naturally, as if the person in the car had opened the door for him. Through his best friend's analysis, the kidnapper not only had sensitive photos of Wei-ju, but was also forcing him to divorce Wei-ju. All signs indicated that the other person might be Wei-ju's lover on the side. It's definitely an affair. Hearing this, a fire of anger ignited in Baek Saw-eon's heart. When he received another call from the kidnapper, he, as if jealous, immediately hung up after answering. This left Wei-ju on the other end a little bewildered. So, not understanding what was happening, Wei-ju started frantically calling Baek Saw-eon. Finally, someone answered. For an agitated pervert, this is the kind of punishment they deserve. Call back in 5 minutes. Finally, after waiting 5 minutes, she called back on time. Unexpectedly, Saw-eon opened his mouth and praised her for being so obedient. Wei Ju was extremely annoyed after hearing this. The two were about to start a war of words, when suddenly an explosion was heard from a distance. The loud noise startled Wei Ju. She rushed home, but couldn't find Baek Seo-yeon in any of the rooms. His phone was also unreachable. Wei Ju immediately had a bad feeling. It wasn't until she watched the news the next morning that she learned Seo-yeon's office had exploded last night. The camera showed it was caused by a person in black. His build was very similar to the man who kidnapped Wei Ju. As she felt her hair stand on end, Seo-yeon suddenly came home looking disheveled. He lifted Wei Ju onto the table, intending to lift her skirt to check if there was a mole on her thigh. This sudden action startled Wei Ju. She struggled to push her husband away, and questioned him, saying he was clearly hurt by the kidnapper. So why was he looking for the truth on her body? Seo-yeon was questioned until he was speechless, and had to give up. He then went back to the living room to clean up, and told Wei Ju not to go out alone. While he was gone, Wei Ju rushed back to her room, and deleted that photo. The next day at work, Seo-yeon was constantly distracted. He secretly checked Wei Ju's social media account, and happened to see her university senior post a photo of them together. Wei Ju was smiling brightly beside him. Seo-yeon immediately became jealous. Therefore, when he heard they had a date to eat at a restaurant this Saturday, he deliberately showed up at the scene. Wei Ju didn't expect her husband to be there. She just wanted to find a hole to crawl into. Especially during the meal, Seo-yeon not only showed a hostile attitude, but also deliberately made things difficult for Ji Sang-woo. Seeing the two of them full of tension, Wei Ju quickly made an excuse to leave. Unexpectedly, Seo-yeon followed closely behind and blocked her at the door. Wei Ju was unhappy that her husband followed her, and treated her university senior disrespectfully. What are you doing here? How did you know? Seo-yeon, resentfully, snatched the phone. To me, he's a thug who's always lurking around you. As he left, Seo-yeon asked for one of Ji Sang-woo's business cards. Back at the company, he immediately watched his live stream. At first, Seo-yeon was very dismissive, until his assistant said that the content of Ji Sang-woo's show was mainly about mystery cases, and had over 200,000 female subscribers on the platform. He couldn't laugh anymore. The assistant played a video of Ji Sang-woo at the gym, saying that his shoulders and muscles were a work of art. Seo-yeon was speechless after hearing this. He didn't expect his wife's taste to be so unique, and by learning about his wife's university life, Seo-yeon also discovered that his wife always had a dream of becoming a sign language interpreter. At the same time, Wei Ju was harassed by the kidnapper again. The kidnapper forced her to call Seo-yeon, and the first thing she said was to tell him to quickly divorce Wei Ju. This further convinced Seo-yeon that the other person was his wife's secret lover. Therefore, the first thing he said when he got home was to inform Wei Ju that he would not divorce her. At the same time, he also decided to let Wei Ju interview for the position of interpreter for his office. This made Wei Ju very confused. She asked Baek Seo-yeon why he wanted her by his side. You're always hasty and clumsy. If you become the sign language interpreter for the president's office, can you handle the consequences? At that point, the whole world will know your name and appearance. Unexpectedly, Baek Seo-yeon mocked Wei Ju, telling her not to worry about him, but to just worry about how she could stand out among the crowd of candidates. Wei Ju bluntly told him that she would definitely be chosen, because no one is as professional as she is. After saying that, Baek Seo-yeon went straight into Wei Ju's bedroom. By the time Wei Ju reacted, she found that Seo-yeon was already lying on her bed. He even told Wei Ju to hurry up and lie down to sleep. Seeing that Wei Ju had no intention of agreeing, Seo-yeon unceremoniously turned off the bedroom light. What, are you afraid I'll pin you down? Baek Seo-yeon's reverse psychology worked immediately. Provoked, Wei Ju stormed over, snatched her pillow, and lay straight down on the bed. Unexpectedly, Seo-yeon did this just so Wei Ju could sleep well. After all, the kidnapper knew his office address, so it was clear that home wasn't safe either. Not only that, Baek Seo-yeon also warmly comforted Wei Ju, telling her to just treat what happened on the day of the kidnapping as a nightmare. Even the harsh words Wei Ju heard then should be forgotten. The sudden change in attitude left Wei Ju a little confused. As for Baek Seo-yeon, he waited until he confirmed that Wei Ju was asleep before getting up to leave. In her dream, Wei Ju remembered her childhood experience. It turned out Wei Ju had been in a serious car accident, which caused the tycoon family's biological daughter to go deaf. The only son also died in this accident. Her mother, worried that Wei Ju, the sole survivor, would anger the tycoon family, demanded that she never speak again. Otherwise, the two of them could be kicked out at any moment. Thinking of this, Wei Ju woke up in fear. Soon, Wei Ju received a video call from her father, and the person who answered was the kidnapper from years ago. The kidnapper knew Wei Ju had taken the phone with the voice-changing processor. When he learned Wei Ju wanted to use this phone to threaten Baek Seo-yeon into a divorce, the kidnapper demanded that Wei Ju continuously call Baek Seo-yeon, or he would break into her house to take the phone back. Frightened, Wei Ju rushed to the nursing home. After confirming her father was okay, Wei Ju's anxious heart finally relaxed. She never expected this matter to involve her father, and her father's mouth kept muttering the kidnapper's words. Call him. On the way to the police station, the radio suddenly emitted a strange sound. This couldn't help but make Wei Ju recall the situation when she was kidnapped. Coupled with the kidnapper's threat, and the phrase her father kept muttering, Wei Ju just felt nauseous. Seeing this, the police could only pull the car over. Unexpectedly, Wei Ju started crying and laughing out loud. My life, why has it never been easy? Why haven't you had a child after being married for so long? Just then, a car sped towards them. Seeing that there was also a police escort, the two young police officers were instantly stunned. Saw Eon was seen slowly getting out of the car, and then walked over to Wei Ju. "She is my wife." Hearing this, Wei Ju was instantly stunned. She never expected that Saw Eon would publicly announce their relationship in front of the police. But then, he worried that his identity would cause unnecessary trouble for Wei Ju. So he privately asked the police not to reveal this matter. In exchange, when he came to the police station to file a report, he would take a photo with the two officers. In the car, Beck Saw Eon comforted Wei Ju, saying he would help move his father-in-law to another nursing home. That way, Wei Ju wouldn't have to worry about her father's safety anymore. Hearing this, Wei Ju's long-suppressed emotions completely erupted. She burst into tears in front of Beck Saw Eon. This both shocked and surprised Saw Eon beside her. Ever since he knew Wei Ju, she had never opened her mouth to speak. This made Beck Saw Eon overjoyed, although he teased Wei Ju that she looked ugly when she cried. He kept comforting her, saying if she wanted to cry, just cry. There was no need to worry about anything in front of him. Hearing this, Wei Ju cried even harder, as if letting out all the grievances of the past years. Soon, it was time for Wei Ju's interview. Her colleague video called to cheer Wei Ju on. Wei Ju was deeply moved. She hung up and carefully asked her husband if she passed the interview, would it cause trouble for their parents? Saw Eon, however, hoped she would stop being an obedient child and try to do what she wanted. Unexpectedly, Wei Ju was extremely confident, telling her husband to think about how to deal with the consequences first, because she would definitely pass the interview anyway. At first, Saw Eon paid no mind, until the day of the interview. He saw Wei Ju interpreting his video, and her sign language speed was sometimes even faster than his speech. This proficient skill made Saw Eon feel it was unbelievable. He burst into the interview room, and played his other videos. The result was no exception. He asked Wei Ju how she did it. Wei Ju honestly told him that many years ago, she was a fan of Beck Saw Eon, and dreamed of one day being his sign language interpreter. So, she downloaded all his videos and practiced them repeatedly, memorizing his pronunciation carefully, and could even predict what he would say next. Knowing that the wife he deeply loves is also his fan, Beck Saw Eon was secretly overjoyed. But just as their two hearts were getting closer, Wei Ju suddenly saw a message. Her sister who ran away from the wedding had just returned to the country. Wei Ju immediately felt an unnamed danger. She immediately ran into the room to find the wedding ring, because she clearly remembered Saw Eon saying on their wedding day, if the owner of the ring returns, you might have to return it. The next day, when Wei Ju attended an event, due to her restricted identity, she couldn't go with her husband. Seeing Saw Eon talking and laughing happily with a group of women, Wei Ju felt unhappy and sighed, especially when she heard everyone around her thinking her sister was Saw Eon's wife. She felt like a clown. Upset, she went alone to the rooftop to drink away her sorrows. At this moment, the kidnapper sent a message, reminding her not to forget to make a threatening call to Saw Eon. Wei Ju obediently made the call, but she opened her mouth and asked Beck Saw Eon, on the day before the wedding, when he heard Hong Ane had disappeared and her younger sister was taking her place. How did you feel? Hearing Beck Saw Eon give a perfunctory answer, Wei Ju suddenly mocked herself. She said Hong Wei Ju was of no great use. Not only did she have a gloomy appearance, but she also didn't know how to communicate. Any man who married her wouldn't be happy. Saw Eon listened silently, and corrected that Wei Ju wasn't gloomy at all. She doesn't not know how to communicate. It's just that others are usually rude to her first. Furthermore, she doesn't succumb to money. She just loves her mother from the bottom of her heart. Saw Eon didn't allow others to casually comment on his wife, but he didn't know that Wei Ju on the other end of the line was sobbing. She asked her husband, since Hong Wei Ju was so good, why did he always treat her as if she were invisible? While Wei Ju was emotional, she suddenly heard footsteps behind her. She whipped around, and was shocked to see her husband standing right behind her. Seeing this, Beck Saw Eon was also stunned. His mute wife was actually talking on the phone. Full of suspicion, he stepped closer. Wei Ju was so nervous she almost fell. Luckily, Saw Eon was quick enough to catch her with his body. Why are you standing so high up? Are you crazy enough to want to die? The sudden anger startled Wei Ju. She was so panicked she accidentally let out a hiccup. This further exposed the secret that she could speak. Saw Eon couldn't help but laugh coldly. He had been deceived by his wife for over 20 years. To prove he hadn't misheard, he told Wei Ju to try making a sound like she just did. Wei Ju pretended to be clueless. This made Saw Eon fly into a rage for no reason. Just then, his phone rang again. Wei Ju quickly took the opportunity to slip away. The assistant informed Saw Eon that the kidnapper's location had been traced, showing that he was right in his hotel. Saw Eon's first reaction was to look towards his wife, but he found this thought absurd. Suddenly thinking of his wife's safety, he frantically rushed towards the elevator, and saw that Wei Ju had just left. Saw Eon quickly took the stairs next to it, until he saw his wife sitting safely in the lobby. He breathed a sigh of relief. The assistant told Saw Eon he had sent the results of the kidnapper's voice analysis to Beck Saw Eon's phone. Through comparison, it was discovered Wei Ju's voice and the kidnapper's voice had a similarity of 99.99%. Learning the truth, Beck Saw Eon immediately collapsed onto the bed. Unable to sleep, Saw Eon suddenly burst into Wei Ju's bedroom, wanting to know why she had deceived him as well. Unexpectedly, Wei Ju took out her phone and said everyone has secrets, and asked him back if he didn't have anything to hide from her. Saw Eon was immediately speechless. Luckily, that was just his imagination. In reality, he didn't have the courage to question Wei Ju, because he himself had an identity he couldn't reveal. After their last call, Saw Eon realized that all along, Wei Ju only wanted his attention. His cold attitude not only failed to protect her, but also deeply hurt her heart. Therefore, Saw Eon decided not to hide his feelings anymore. He specially organized a team building event so that Wei Ju could eat a lunchbox made with love. He prepared one for every employee. On the bus, seeing someone sitting next to Wei Ju, he jealously said he gets carsick, and then took the other person's seat. He even threw the drink that person gave Wei Ju on the floor. The reason being that Wei Ju couldn't drink coffee on an empty stomach. After arriving, everyone started warming up. Saw Eon not only proactively asked to be in the same group as Wei Ju, but after winning, he excitedly hugged her and spun her around. As a result, this scene left the employees wide-eyed. Sorry, I got a little too excited. The host asked Saw Eon if he wanted any prize. He immediately remembered being on the bus. Seeing his subordinate's phone lock screen was a picture with his wife. So he wanted one too. He even made a heart shape while taking the picture. After the group reached the mountain peak, a few middle-aged women suddenly recognized Saw Eon's identity as the presidential spokesperson. So they excitedly wanted to take a picture with him. However, in the midst of the chaos, someone secretly pushed Wei Ju, causing her to fall down a deep cliff. Saw Eon turned around and couldn't see his wife. He panicked. Time passed by. Second by second, the rescue team still found nothing. Meanwhile, Wei Ju, who had fallen down the cliff, opened her eyes. It was already dark. She was seriously injured and couldn't move. She intended to take out her phone to call for help, but the phone was broken. She endured the pain and opened her bag, and found a voice-changing phone inside. But the phone could only call Saw Eon. If she called, it would be no different from revealing her identity. Wei Ju struggled for a moment, but still called her husband. On the other side, Saw Eon was searching everywhere in the mountains, and was extremely excited to see a call from number 406. Before Wei Ju could react, Saw Eon said he had put a first aid kit in his wife's bag. At the bottom, there was also a handheld flare. Just striking the cap on top can light it. After hearing this, Wei Ju used her hand to get the bag, but it was hard to use strength due to her abdominal pain. The temperature has dropped a lot. Is Wei Ju cold? There is also water in the bag. Dehydration would be bad. She has to drink some water. Okay, I see it. Hearing this, Wei Ju felt wronged and burst into tears. To quickly save Wei Ju, Beck Saw Eon didn't wait for the rescue team to arrive, but hurriedly carried Wei Ju and ran down the mountain. After taking Wei Ju to the hospital, Beck Saw Eon, with a tired face, stayed by her bedside until Wei Ju slowly opened her eyes. Beck Saw Eon got up, intending to call a doctor. Unexpectedly, Wei Ju stopped him. Don't go. At this moment, Beck Saw Eon's heart was filled with both self-blame and fear. He never expected that Wei Ju would have an accident during the team building. Therefore, when he actually heard Wei Ju's voice, Beck Saw Eon for a moment couldn't believe it was real. He could only keep comforting the frightened Wei Ju, and promised he wouldn't leave. Waking up, the more Wei Ju thought, the more she felt something was wrong. If Beck Saw Eon didn't know she was the one who frequently called using phone number 406, then why after she fell off the cliff, did Beck Saw Eon instruct her to open the first aid kit to send a distress signal? Moreover, Saw Eon's tone on the phone, although it seemed like he was talking to the kidnapper, was actually talking to her. Clearly, Beck Saw Eon already knew she was 406. But the strange thing is, why did Beck Saw Eon, after guessing, not say anything at all? For a moment, Wei Ju was also baffled by this action of Beck Saw Eon. Unexpectedly, Beck Saw Eon had already gotten that phone from his assistant. Gotten that phone, but he didn't confront Wei Ju directly, but secretly put the phone back into Wei Ju's bag. Seeing Wei Ju silent again, Beck Saw Eon lifted her onto the hospital bed. Faced with Beck Saw Eon's sudden confession, I like it, feeling your heartbeat. Faced with Beck Saw Eon's sudden confession, Wei Ju was also extremely flustered. She didn't know how to respond. Then, Beck Saw Eon told Wei Ju. He had long known the secret that she could speak. Perhaps the things I know are more than what Wei Ju can imagine. For example, 406. Seeing Wei Ju panic, Beck Saw Eon quickly explained. It was 406 who told him the location where she fell off the cliff, so he could arrive in time. Although it's possible 406 pushed her off the cliff. On the other hand, 406 also did him a big favor. Therefore, Beck Saw Eon was wondering whether to forgive him, or to hand that person over to the police. Hearing this, Wei Ju intended to confess everything to Beck Saw Eon. Unexpectedly, Beck Saw Eon suddenly changed the subject, saying that the most important thing for Wei Ju to do now is to rest completely. Although he has many questions and unsolved mysteries, but for the sake of Wei Ju's health, he won't ask much now. Furthermore, he has already requested sick leave for Wei Ju. So, during this time, what Wei Ju needs to do is to recover. After saying that, he gave Wei Ju a new phone, and said he would be gone for a few hours. During this time, if Wei Ju needs anything, just contact him. After Beck Saw Eon left, Wei Ju quickly took that phone out of her bag. She didn't know if Beck Saw Eon had discovered this secret, but thinking about how she wanted to divorce Beck Saw Eon, and use the kidnapper's phone to make many threatening calls, Wei Ju's heart was filled with self-blame. Seeing Beck Saw Eon not only brought his own clothes, but also his personal belongings, Wei Ju thought Beck Saw Eon intended to stay here with her. After hearing Beck Saw Eon say they had slept together last night, Wei Ju's uneasy heart became anxious. She even imagined where Beck Saw Eon should sleep at night, especially when the sound of running water came from the bathroom. Wei Ju mistakenly thought Beck Saw Eon was taking a shower. Unexpectedly, Beck Saw Eon was only doing that to wash Wei Ju's hair. Although Beck Saw Eon was very clumsy during the process, waves of warmth filled Wei Ju's heart. After washing her hair, Saw Eon then kindly used a hairdryer to help her dry it. This unusual action confused Wei Ju. Looking at the scar on Wei Ju's neck, Baek Saw-eon's heart was filled with both regret and remorse, because he felt he hadn't done anything for Wei Ju, and instead let her suffer so much alone. After putting Wei Ju on the bed, Baek Saw-eon finally had time to take a cold shower. He immediately checked if Wei Ju was asleep. Unexpectedly, Wei Ju pretended to be asleep, so scared she could only squeeze her eyes shut, afraid of what Baek Saw-eon would do to her next. Fortunately, it was all just Wei Ju's overthinking. Actually, Saw-eon just wanted to help her adjust the bed to the most comfortable position. At this moment, Wei Ju's heart was pounding wildly. When Wei Ju woke up, she discovered Baek Saw-eon had left the hospital room, so she took out the 406 phone again, and sneaked out the door. Unexpectedly, Baek Saw-eon saw everything. Without hesitation, Wei Ju called Baek Saw-eon's phone again, saying it was time to meet him, and then clear up the misunderstandings. Next, Wei Ju followed Baek Saw-eon's instructions, and went to the top of the tower at the amusement park. Faced with having to be honest with Baek Saw-eon, Wei Ju's heart was a little scared, because Wei Ju was worried that when Baek Saw-eon saw that the kidnapper was her, he would be very shocked, perhaps very disappointed or feel lonely. Your habit of being obedient, when will you ever be able to change it? Actually, Baek Saw-eon had been waiting for a long time for Wei Ju to tell the truth herself. Seeing Wei Ju open up in front of him, Baek Saw-eon was scared. He wasn't sure, when his secret was discovered, how Wei Ju would react. Why don't you hate me? Please tell me how I can hate you. It turns out, 20 years ago, the real Baek Saw-eon had antisocial tendencies, always staying alone in his room abusing small animals. Her son's behavior frightened his mother, so she always locked Baek Saw-eon at home. While the fake Baek Saw-eon was just a fisherman's son, he and his adoptive father depended on each other, living a simple and quiet life, until one night, he suddenly saw a man forcefully pushing a child underwater. Frightened, he immediately froze on the spot. Luckily, his adoptive father appeared in time to take him away. But unexpectedly, the next day, Baek Saw-eon was picked up by a luxury car, and never saw his adoptive father again. From this moment on, he became Baek Saw-eon's replacement, living every day under pressure and in pain. His mother forced him to learn to imitate Baek Saw-eon's lifestyle, eating the food Baek Saw-eon liked, until Wei Ju appeared, bringing a ray of light into his dark life. Every time he watched Wei Ju practice sign language through the window, Saw-eon's heart felt very peaceful. Therefore, when he learned that Wei Ju was about to marry a playboy, Baek Saw-eon made a deal with Han and A to have Wei Ju replace her sister and become his wife. Perhaps in Baek Saw-eon's dominated life, this was the only time he fought for an identity for himself. At the same time, Baek Saw-eon received an anonymous call. The other person only left a few words: he's still alive. The investigation showed the call was made from a fishing tackle shop. A bold idea flashed through his mind. Without a second thought, Baek Saw-eon immediately ran to the fishing tackle shop. As a result, when he arrived, the house was already burning fiercely. Seeing his adoptive father dying, Baek Saw-eon didn't care about his own safety, and dragged his adoptive father's body outside. Unexpectedly, at this moment, an explosion suddenly occurred in the house. Fortunately, Baek Saw-eon didn't die, and the person who saved him was Wei Ju's university senior, Ji Sang-woo. It turned out that just before Baek Saw-eon arrived at the fishing tackle shop, Ji Sang-woo had already gone there to investigate the disappearances at the orphanage. As a result, Baek Saw-eon's adoptive father refused to say anything, and even pushed Ji Sang-woo out. Getting nothing, he had to go back. But on the way, he passed by Baek Saw-eon, because Baek Saw-eon was heading in the direction of the fishing tackle shop he had just left. Ji Sang-woo followed him. Then, Ji Sang-woo took him to the hospital for treatment. During the treatment, Baek Saw-eon's phone kept receiving calls from Wei Ju, so Sang-woo called back. After getting the news, Wei Ju rushed to the hospital. Soon, Baek Saw-eon was wheeled out of the operating room. Looking at the injured Baek Saw-eon, Wei Ju's heart ached. Unexpectedly, at this time, Ji Sang-woo was just as heartbroken as Wei Ju, because he had liked Wei Ju since university. But this love had to end before it even began. This scene also made Wei Ju remember the time when she fell off the cliff. Fell into despair. It was Baek Saw-eon who did his best to search and guide her, giving her hope to survive. Wei Ju cried even more sorrowfully. Fortunately, the next day Baek Saw-eon woke up. When he opened his eyes and saw Wei Ju, his heart felt extremely at ease. Then, Wei Ju used the excuse of calling a doctor to leave the room. After Wei Ju left, Ji Sang-woo also came to visit, and told Baek Saw-eon that this was his father's hospital. He had ensured that the news of his injury would not be leaked, telling Baek Saw-eon to rest and recover here without worry. Seeing that Ji Sang-woo was seriously injured for saving him, Baek Saw-eon's heart was filled with guilt. After all, he had previously suspected Ji Sang-woo was the kidnapper threatening him. Now it seems he only wanted to investigate the truth about the missing children at the orphanage. It turned out that Ji Sang-woo back then and the real Saw-eon were in the same orphanage. Baek Saw-eon, who inherited his father's heterochromia, coupled with his innate antisocial tendencies, caused him to wreak havoc at the orphanage, even cruelly harming several of his playmates. Just because his grandfather was the president, the case was perfunctorily closed as a disappearance, and the grandfather also decided to get rid of his own grandson, to have the fake, nameless Baek Saw-eon replace him. It's just that Baek Saw-eon didn't know that his real identity was the grandfather's illegitimate son. After getting rid of his grandson, the grandfather told the adoptive father to handle it. As a result, when the adoptive father was about to act, he discovered the child was still alive, although the real Baek Saw-eon had lost his memory. and his intelligence had greatly declined. But in the end, it was still a human life. The adoptive father's heart softened, and he decided to spare him. Although the adoptive father saved that child's life, he couldn't change his nature. After that, Baek Seo-eon went alone to the place his adoptive father mentioned. But unexpectedly, that place had countless small mounds of earth. Clearly, these were all the crimes committed by the real Baek Seo-eon. At this moment, Baek Seo-eon's reporter friend called him, saying he had found the missing twin brother from the orphanage, and this person was Baek Seo-eon's assistant. At this point, Baek Seo-eon had a realization. It turned out the person who pushed Wei-ju off the mountain was the assistant. And right now, Wei-ju was in danger. So he hurriedly called Wei-ju. But no one answered. Unexpectedly, at this time, Wei-ju had been drugged by the assistant. When the assistant kidnapped Wei-ju, he called the kidnapper. As a result, when the kidnapper arrived, the assistant didn't hand Wei-ju over to him, because the assistant had already discovered that the kidnapper was the real Baek Seo-eon. It turned out that day, the assistant also followed him to the fishing tackle shop. Through a crack in the door, he heard the conversation between the real Baek Seo-eon and his adoptive father. At this moment, he discovered that the one who had harmed his brother was this guy. And for all these years, he had considered Baek Seo-eon as his target for revenge. So, to avenge his dead brother, the assistant hit the real Seo-eon with a stick. But he was no match for him at all. Soon, the assistant was knocked unconscious by the kidnapper. When Baek Seo-eon arrived, there was no sign of Wei-ju. He thought Wei-ju had been killed by the kidnapper, so he frantically rushed into the middle of the lake. But when he opened the bag, he found the unconscious assistant inside. At this moment, the car behind suddenly let out a roar. Seo-eon then realized Wei-ju was in the car, so he ran towards the car with all his might. At the same time, Wei-ju was also slowly regaining consciousness. She didn't want to see Baek Seo-eon being threatened by others, so she grabbed the kidnapper's head. Finally, the car lost control and crashed into a rock. Seeing this, Wei-ju quickly got out of the car and ran to Baek Seo-eon's side. The kidnapper didn't give up and wanted to reverse the car to kill them both. Fortunately, they successfully avoided the car, escaping a calamity. Enraged, Baek Seo-eon rushed forward and dragged the kidnapper out of the car, preparing to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. The moment he saw the kidnapper's eyes, he was even more certain that the kidnapper was the real Baek Seo-eon. Is it you? So what do you want? Your name, your position, I'll give you everything. Really? Yes, so you'll give me Wei-ju too? Hearing this, Seo-eon was completely enraged, because Wei-ju was not just his limit, but also the person he wanted to protect for his entire life. Unexpectedly, the next second, the kidnapper pulled a dagger from his pocket, preparing to stab Baek Seo-eon. In the nick of time, the assistant suddenly rushed forward and pushed the kidnapper away, thereby saving Baek Seo-eon. But unexpectedly, the assistant was stabbed by the kidnapper. Seeing this, Baek Seo-eon rushed over to press on the assistant's abdominal wound to stop the bleeding, while the kidnapper took advantage of the chaos to escape. At this time, the assistant finally revealed the truth that he had mistaken him for the enemy, and worked with the kidnapper to try to kill him. Soon, the police took over the case, and Baek Seo-eon also publicly revealed his wife's identity for the first time. As soon as this news was released, it immediately shocked everyone. They never expected that Wei-ju was Baek Seo-eon's wife. Not only that, even Baek Seo-eon's identity was fake. Now, the nameless Baek Seo-eon, his only identity was just someone's husband. And so, under Seo-eon's passionate pursuit, the little mute wife finally spoke. And the first thing she said to Baek Seo-eon was, "I love you." From then on, the two healed each other and lived a happy and passionate life. The movie ends here. Thank you for watching. Please give us a like and subscribe to the channel. See you again.